It's August 30, Ukraine Media Center continues its operation. My name is Svetlana Chepareka, and now we will have a press conference dedicated to the persons missing in action. What are the obstacles to search and justice? There is a reason we talk about it. Today is the Global Day of People Missing in Action. So we will discuss the problems and possible solutions to them. So joining us in the studio today are Olena Bieliachkova, coordinator for the group of families of prisoners of war at Media Initiative for Human Rights, a lawyer; Valentyna Akulenko, head of the department secretariat of the Commissioner for Persons Missing in Special Circumstances; Tetiana Hoidyk, sister of Oleh Hurko, a missing soldier of the 95th Separate Air Assault Brigade; and right about to join us is Olena Yahupova, representative of the Civilians in Captivity NGO, former civilian hostage. And before we proceed to this discussion, I suggest we watch a small video to set a tone for our conversation. A couple of days before the winter, my doctor told me that they are setting up for the mission long term, like 2 weeks. Don't do anything for 2 weeks. I will be over there without any communications. In the morning, he told me we're setting out. He sent me a heart, and this heart was the last message I got for him so far. On the 14th of December, my brother had a birthday. On the 15th, I get a notification he's gone missing in action. That's one of the worst days in my life, in the life of my mom. Basically, I couldn't find life force to move on, to keep fighting. Unfortunately, when such things happen, people cannot find anything to rely upon, and this union, when people get united by one problem, when you cry it out to each other, it helps you carry on first and further on too, because it doesn't get easier with time, it just gets different. And the union is what helped me to find hope, to understand that I should keep on fighting, that it all makes sense. Well, no one wants to hear out to one person, but if there is a group of persons, they just have no choice. They have to listen to you. Union is strength. Unite for the search of your loved ones. Well, such stories are unfortunately numerous, and the figures that we are about to disclose, they all have human lives behind them, the stories of the families, the stories of the loved ones, those who have gone missing in action. So, Miss Olena, let me ask you, what are the official figures of those gone missing? What is the number of military and what is the number of civilians among them? Good afternoon. Today is really a difficult day. It's a difficult topic to discuss. And talking about the figures, what was recently announced during one of these press conferences here, this number is more than 51,000 of those missing in action. That number includes both military and civilians, both children and adults. But this figure includes those whose whereabouts are known to us, and some of them were also already exchanged. Some of them are the identified bodies, but again, this number is not so close to reality. The figure is based on the register of people missing in action under special circumstances, which means that is the information in relation to which the criminal investigations were initiated. But there is still a problem with the verification of all those figures, because not all of the relatives can submit an application or report, or sometimes they live in temporarily occupied territories and have no access to the agencies they can address to submit their reports to make sure that the request for a missing person shows up in the register. So our organization, Media Initiative for Human Rights, we are in touch with the Secretariat of the Commissioner. We provide the data that is available to us to make sure that all that information is as precise as possible and the information is added to the register. And talking about the number of civilians and number of the military, probably the representative of Secretariat can provide you with more detailed information if it's even possible to verify those numbers. And for the time being, not only the relatives, but also the military units submit reports about the military missing in action, specifically those units that submit to the Ministry of Internal Affairs to make sure that the information is not lost anywhere, to make sure that all of the people missing in action are on the register. And to put it in perspective, compared to the last year when we were gathering for the same conference, the relatives were saying that the data doesn't always work, even in the information about the people who were gone missing in action in the beginning of year 2022 are still absent from the register, but now the information was verified and the register is better populated. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Valentyna, can you give us the numbers? What are the numbers of the civilians and military who were gone missing in action, and what does the state do to help you search for those missing in action and to get at least any information about that? Well, the information is sensitive in relation to the military and civilians, specifically the children. This is why we cannot disclose all of the numbers, but we still work on identifying the relation of any person gone missing to the units they were assigned to, or in case of civilians, we try to find the families and to identify or to verify the whereabouts of those people, specifically the children who were illegally deported either through the specialized schools, who deported from Ukraine, and to identify the whereabouts of those children who are fostering them and what is the status of those kids in other places. Thank you very much. We have an opportunity to hear a couple of stories of the people whose relatives were either in captivity or who were gone missing. Miss Olena, you were held captive by the enemy, so if you are ready, can you please share your story, under which circumstances you were captured, how did you get free, and tell us about your active civil work that you're doing to help the relatives of those missing in action to find their loved ones. Well, when it happened to me, first I was kidnapped, then I was kept in captivity in one confinement cell, then in another in temporarily occupied territory, then my way was continuing as slaver. So from that confinement cell, they were handing over, selling people, but one way or another, people ended up as slaves. And for what I understand, the situation continues being like this in those territories, but now we're having more complications than there used to be before, when people didn't have passports. The mass passportization was not still in effect. And then when we started getting threatened and otherwise forced to get the passports, then when people got detained or kidnapped or abducted, obviously they are being accused under some fabricated premises and are brought to court under the laws of Russian Federation. So before that, they could not accuse me of Article 282 extremism because I was not a citizen of the Russian Federation. But now, just yesterday, one of friends of mine called me crying, and she said that her daughter was forced to get a Russian passport because she was looking after her elderly grandmother. And then there were FSB representatives coming to her. They took away her phone because she was donating to armed forces of Ukraine. They found her correspondence on the phone with likes and everything. And that's not a unique case. Under that Article 275, it seems to me, it's a high treason. And this is what they accuse the population there in mass, because they force, like everybody, probably not 100%, but 90% of the people were forcibly passportized, and now they apply such punishment to them. I don't remember what is the sentence, like starting from 20 years up to life sentence. This is what's happening in the occupied territories now. It's not necessarily that people end up in confinement cell. They may end up in prison, labor camp, and it's virtually impossible to find that person, because if there are relatives who observe the movement of that person to the places of captivity, that's one thing, but in case they have no relatives, it's virtually impossible to find such people. And what Russians do, or what their relatives do, that they come to human rights organizations, maybe even the Russian ones or the foreign ones. Well, sometimes they can be the citizens of Russia who don't reside in Russia, but they are familiar with the practice. So those are the ways that people use to attempt to help. But what I can say, probably that's my personal conclusion and my personal statistics. It's not like I've read it somewhere, but something that I've seen with my own eyes. In those places of captivity, in slavery, there are way more civilians rather than the military prisoners of war. And those labor camps, they are so numerous in Russian Federation. Even within the first year of the full-scale invasion, year 22-23, they were building those camps for the civilians mainly, because they don't have such a number of prisoners of war, and they cannot have such a number of military prisoners of war. So we have to understand what is it done for. Our people under any premises are being deported to the territory of Russian Federation, and there they may change location all the time, like moving from one labor camp from another. But how can we bring those people back? Everybody keeps saying we have to develop a mechanism to bring them back. In my opinion, it's better to develop a mechanism to prevent them from ending up in that slavery, because bringing them back, first of all, is difficult. And on top of that, meanwhile, people stay there. Like I spent half a year over there, but during that period, I had my head injured. I had a lot of problems with my health, and I think that this is something that's gonna stay with me until the end of my life. And my case was not the worst, because there were people staying with me, and they really had way worse condition of staying and the condition of their health. So again, it's better to develop a mechanism to prevent our civilians from ending up in captivity. Thank you very much for sharing your story, Ms. Tetiana. The floor is yours. Your brother has gone missing. Do you know at least anything about him for the time being, and who helps you in search for him? Well, first of all, I would like, as long as I have this opportunity to talk not only about my brother but about others too, We organized different manifestations in coordination with the families of other military who were gone missing in action. I was one of the organizers of such manifestations, and my friends support me. So in Zhytomyr, where 95th Air Assault Brigade is based, you become a part of this community, and you understand that all those people, they are all like a part of your family. The problems that used to exist when I found out about my brother gone missing, we found out only on the 18th of December. Well, you understand, assault is like a one-time activity, and even my brother was mentioning that communication is a little bit broken. Yeah, well, there were some problems in communication with the military unit. First of all, when I'm telling you this to rectify the situation, not to criticize anybody, because it's been more than a year and a half that I haven't been getting any news about my brother. So as I called them, well, thanks God that was me, not my mother, who I don't know how would she perceive that information. And that person in charge of communications in 95th Brigade, when I called them and I asked them what's going on about my brother, well, she told me, like, most likely he's dead. Well, I didn't know whether that's a proper way of communication, and I had that switch inside of me, and I switched to the lawyer mode, not to the like sister mode. And I told them, like, if anybody else calls you, like, don't ever tell anything like this to any other person. So and she asked me, like, what should I tell you? And I tell them, like, so what is the status on your register? They say he's missing in action, so this is what you're supposed to say then. So now, thanks to the efforts of the families of the prisoners of war and missing in action, we cannot segregate these two notions. We always fight together, because the such status as missing in action is way more terrible. And this is what the friends of mine from the families of prisoners of war recognize, because missing in action is an uncertain loss, and some loss that you cannot stop experiencing. And one friend of mine whose brother was killed, she told me in the beginning, like, my situation is way easier than yours. And I was shocked, like, her brother was killed. And I'm like, why are you telling me this? And she says, like, at least I know that he's buried, I know the place he's buried, I can come to his grave and cry there. But you have no idea where your brother is. Like, it's either he's prisoner of war or he's dead or not. So it's uncertain. So this is the status that you cannot stop living with for a single second. And the only one who helps me are our community, the civil organizations established to support the families of those missing in action and the prisoners of war. The government agencies, they are mired in some bureaucratic standards. People who are not involved in this topic, they may not understand it, but they may ask, why does it take so long to identify the bodies in the war? But we were not prepared for the war. We don't have a relevant number of specialists who can make DNA samples without any errors, because the families were coming to me as a lawyer, and I helped them pro bono to all of the families of the prisoners of war and those missing in action. And once I had a woman, she had a 100% match with the mother of her husband, and she was requiring for additional tests, additional sampling. And it was good that the investigation officer was quite an adequate person. She was doing the right thing. She was a wife who was looking for her husband, and those cases are numerous, and many may not understand why does it take so long to identify a body with some injuries. Well, why the body is not being released without DNA sampling, but we don't have a right to error, because you will be doubting until the rest of your life that it's your husband staying there in the tomb. I mean, you're not going to forgive yourself. Then first people act impulsively, but then they here for a reason. But we were not ready for such a war. We were not ready for such a number of our loved ones missing in action. So as I've become part of this community of people whose relatives gone missing, and I've realized that if you want to help yourself, so go and help yourself. Now this work is better coordinated, because when I joined this process, there was not such number of civil organizations, associations who could give you a step-by-step instruction where to go, what other paperwork you have to process, what reports to submit to which agencies. There was no coordinated communication. I was considering myself to be a pretty good lawyer, but I realized that if people end up in such a stressful situation, they cannot think objectively. They have to rely upon the experience of those whose head is colder. I'm not saying they suffer less, no. With time, such pain only becomes stronger, because unidentified loss is something that you cannot live through. You keep living day by day with this uncertainty. You start getting mental disorders, health disorders, and somehow people are ready to talk about the prisoners of war. But when we start talking about those missing in action, the people start telling you, you don't believe, but you cannot always believe. Sometimes you can prohibit your mind not to believe or believe, and you are being told you have to. Some might say, this is what I was coming across among the military. You have to understand, it's like a surgeon who had a couple of patients dying on their surgery table, and I had one of the officers telling me, Tanya, you understand, probably most likely he's dead. And I tell him that until the very last moment that I find out whether he's dead or alive, I'm not gonna stop hoping. So as we were setting up communication with the coordination headquarters, I understand that the state is marked in bureaucracy. Sometimes some information cannot be disclosed due to its secrecy, something that the society cannot be let aware. But I would like this communication to become a little bit more open. We would like to get answers to some specific questions. I really want it. Believe me, as a person who works with this topic for more than a year and a half, I keep coming to the meetings, and the new people keep asking the same questions, but I started getting new questions, and I'm curious about something specific. And during the last 2 meetings, I've got answers to my questions. So basically, those answers can be provided. So I would want our state to be more open and to understand that, unfortunately, our community is growing. The guys continue getting captured. They continue being missing in action, and the state is supposed to be able to set up this communication, to set up a healthy dialogue. I had one case, we had a meeting with coordination headquarters. I'm not gonna tell you about the representative, but he interrupted one of the mothers of one of the guys who's gone missing very harshly, and my lawyer mode switched to a human mode. And I told him, be conscious and talk with respect to a mother who gave the most precious that she had, her child. So show respect. We don't even want your respect. We want you to act. We want you to help us to bring our loved ones back. And I incredibly appreciate the representatives of all of the civil organizations, those girls who take up that burden, communicating with the families who are not always are in adequate conditions. Sometimes you have to switch your cold head on. Because I communicate with my girls too. Sometimes you have to be stricter, but again, I keep saying it, just as much as civil organizations, associations, the relatives organizations do. Probably it would be better to involve more government agencies, because no one understands better the families of those missing in action and the prisoners of war than those who are directly related to it. Thank you, Miss Tetiana. Thank you for sharing your story. Miss Valentyna, I think that it makes sense to address the questions to you. The problems with communication with timing were highlighted numerous times. So what is the way? How does the government works to make sure that the communication is more efficient? It's been more than 10 years of the war. It's been more than 2 years and a half of the hot phase. And I think we have to understand that those processes that used to exist before with a smaller number of prisoners of war, they just don't work anymore. Well, we work with any single applicant, with every family who have such need for communication. We do not only fulfill our functions vested in us by the state, we ensure the activities of the commissioner, of the office of the commissioner, but we also listen to every voice in the hotline. Is the hotline of the commissioner. It works. And talking about the hotline of the Ministry of Defense, more than 50% of the calls to this hotline account for the calls to the office of the commissioner for the persons missing under special circumstances. So you understand, when the relatives call to their loved ones and they get no response, they first of all call to the police and then to other government offices involved in this process. But first of all, the relatives are looking for somebody who has gone missing. And starting from this moment, we start working with the relatives, and on our end, on the end of public service, we start looking for the last known whereabouts of a person missing in action. For the time being, we have a lot of levers, including our department, the Secretariat of the Commissioner. With the help of our specialists, we look at different platforms. We look for confirmation of the fact that people may still be alive. It's good when the families talk to us and we propose them to disclose more detailed information about their loved ones, and people start providing information to us that they have not provided to the police, because not everybody knows that special features are the tattoos, which is quite popular now. But also the people may be found by those specific features, even if there are just couple of pictures popping up anywhere, and we can check out those pictures and to verify whether that's exactly the person we're looking for. This is why we insist the applicants fill the questionnaire on the website of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and to provide as detailed information as possible about the loved ones missing in action, because the more information we have, the more information we can match it with different spaces and platforms that we use for search. Thank you, Ms. Valentyna. Ms. Olena, let me get back to you from the perspective of civil organizations, how the situation can be rectified in Ukraine, how the search for missing persons can become more efficient, and are there any gaps in Ukrainian legislation that become an obstacle in this process? Just like Ms. Tetiana and Ms. Olena have said about the openness of communication with the government agencies, everybody knows that 90% of the information available available for about every single person missing in action and prisoner of war is the information found by the families, because they are the most interested in that information. They are the most open, and they share that information. Us as civil rights organizations, we emphasize that if you find out that your loved ones end up in captivity, you found out about their whereabouts, or if you find out about any court proceedings initiated in their relation, apply to all of the agencies where you applied before, report to them to make sure that the negotiations group have that information and they have information about your loved ones' whereabouts. So the relatives should be ready to communicate with the government agencies. So again, this communication with the coordination headquarters is what we observe. Coordination headquarters is exactly established for this communication between the families and the prisoners and the state. Sometimes there is an impression that coordination headquarters have some crisis in communication with the families. The families are getting tired of seeing them and hearing the same thing again and again. So those ways should be developed, those methods should be developed that would help the families not to lose hope. As one of the therapists told me, she told me, I know that mother's son was dead, there were multiple matches, but asking him, I have no right to convince them. You have no right to deprive her of her hope. That's not within your competence. This is why the coordination headquarters, to avoid those emotional explosions in the families, they should find ways how to explain to the families that they should keep fighting. The situation that unfolded yesterday with the families of the Marines staying near the office of the ICRC. You know that the Marines, their bodies are most frequently returned to Ukraine, tortured to death. And it's International Committee for Red Cross who has a mandate to negotiate the exchanges. We understand that's the only organization, and they say they're not admitted, but it's them who should look for ways to how to visit those places of confinement, places of captivity. And just like Ms. Olena said, we should keep track of the information with their movement. It's difficult with the civilians, but it's in the same way difficult with the military. And this number of the missing in action would be way smaller if Russia provides the number of prisoners of war and the civilians who are being held illegally captive. Those slogans that captivity is not a guarantee of life. Unfortunately, in our reality, it works like that, and we have to have all of the agencies understand it. Talking about the gaps in legislation, we were saying that the status of missing in action is the uncertain loss and is the worst status, and this loss is experienced by the families of both military and civilians who were gone missing, and the states provides more rights and guarantees, in the opinion of the civil organizations, to the families of the military who gone missing, and the right to postponement of mobilization should be also provided to the families not only of the military but also of the civilians who's gone missing, because they experience the loss in the same way, that uncertain loss. And those collisions that still exist, we continue communicating the fact that the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, who adopted the resolution number 560, and the families of the prisoners of war and those gone missing are familiar with it very well. And it says that in order to get the postponement, the relatives should provide the court decision that identifies their relatives as missing in action. And we keep saying that this requirement is in contradiction with other laws on Ukraine, with the constitutional rights, and even the court practice verifies that the courts cannot come up with such a ruling. They cannot even initiate a proceeding. There is a practice when the court just refused to accept a report if they said that all of the information should be available on the register. So basically, this resolution undermined all of the system, and it's difficult to hear it from the family members, like, I'm not ready to give my husband or my son for the situation to repeat again with another loved one missing in action. So all those collisions are difficult to move, you know. There are amendments to this resolution 560 that is still under discussion. They're all supported by the Secretariat of the Commissioner and other departments of the Ministry of Defense, but unfortunately there were no changes made so far. We celebrate, obviously, all those changes made to the law, all those modifications. For example, now the responsibilities of the Commissioner for the persons missing in action were clearly identified. The legislation, and it was identified that those functions are defined by the Cabinet of Ministers during the martial law and 1 year after its end. Also, there were amendments made to the law that stipulated that the relatives of those missing in action have right to postponement, like from one bloodline and from different bloodlines too. For example, one mother may have two different sons from two different matrimonies, but they love them in the same way. So those are the small steps that were taken to make the lives of the families of those missing in action a little bit easier. Dear friends, if we have any questions on the floor. Stanislav Miroshnichenko, Media Initiative for Human Rights. I'm having a question to the representatives of the unions of the prisoners of war and those missing in action. What's your view of the ideal communication with the government agencies involved with this problem? How it should be structured to make sure that I've just heard that you keep coming there, you keep hearing the same things. So how should it be built in your opinion? Well, I cannot tell you from the perspective of a human rights person, because first of all, how do I put it? I see all the shortcomings. I see all of the problems that I experience meanwhile people are in captivity, and specifically when people are already set free, and then that way they have to work is just different because the people are set free, but the hell continues. I'm telling you this from my own experience. So what should be done to avoid it? It's a very broad question. The amendments should be made to the legislation, to not to one law but to a number of different laws. It's not like one document that you have to amend. It's not like one agency that you have to stimulate to make sure that those changes happen. So starting from the military, from the Ministry of Defense, and all the way to the Ministry of Healthcare, a lot of changes should be made. And I cannot say it's impossible. Such changes are possible because, as it was said, it's been more than 10 years of the war. It's been almost 3 years of the full-scale invasion. And how come within this period all those ministries for whom those problems are the most sensitive, they know about those problems, but somehow the amendments are still not made? I cannot say, like, Yes, spending time at the offices and crying it out loud under their windows. I can't say it can be of great influence, but at least it may give us some hope. That's all we can do on our part. And I think that's not sufficient. Probably we need to, how do I put it, either the relatives of those who are kept in captivity or those who were set free. This is my personal conclusion. You have to bring it to court. If the state, if the government cannot peacefully resolve such sensitive problems, you should bring them to court. I don't believe that nothing can be moved from that point. That's my personal conclusion. I was thinking for probably half a year, so probably should go to court to sue the state of Ukraine. I mean, but what else can we do about it? Well, thank you, Ms. Olena, for your answer, Ms. Tetiana. Well, let me put it simply. We have to reorient from such a way of communication like a person to the state. We have to switch to a different mode, like state to a person. I was lucky to get a legal education. I was lucky to be able to dig and to look for. But imagine there is a mother coming from rural area. She has no ways of communication. She has no skills of communication. She has a dumb phone and she cannot even go online. She never needed it. So I keep saying it during our meetings with the coordination headquarters. This is my dream, and I keep telling them it's the government who should come to that mother and tell them where she should go, which paperwork apply to which us, or like submit a request to a military unit. It's the state who should come to her and tell her, like, we want to thank you for your son or daughter. We want to thank you for being this resilient, for carrying on with your loss, hopefully temporary. Please fill this form, please fill this form, and we'll take all reasonable efforts to find your loved ones. Because the social pressure, well, I'm telling you, our state underestimates the size of this community. It may all result in a social explosion. The relatives can get tired. I'm getting tired. I'm getting tired of hearing the same thing. I'm taking a lot of efforts through my personal connections in other states, because what else should I do? Should I keep telling the mother that we keep doing the same thing, or we have done nothing within 1 year? You know, all those demonstrations, yeah, they are of media, meaning they demonstrate something to our foreign partners, that we don't forget about our loved ones, and such demonstrations, they wake our society up, because people want to live in some pink bubble. They want to protect themselves from all of the problems, and we keep telling them, we keep reminding them, they were defending you, and now you have to fight for them, because now there is a problem with the cause and effect, because all those agencies looking for the missing in action, they don't understand that everybody who gets mobilized, who take up their arms to fight for Ukraine, this is something that works in their head. Like, nothing is done to bring the prisoners of war back. Nothing is done for the search of missing in action. In the very beginning, those people who get mobilized, they understand that apart from their families, no one's gonna fight for them. How come their families who find their loved ones in the occupiers' Telegram channels? I'm signed up for a million of those channels. I'm still looking for my brother after 1.5 years. So why should why should those families request the portrait verification? Why the families are supposed to do this? Like the representative of the Secretariat says, like, the first place the families go is the police. No, it's not so. People don't even know they should report police. They don't even know that police starts criminal investigation about prisoner of war or missing in action. Nobody knows it. They need briefing. They need step-by-step briefing. People don't know how to work with the law enforcement agencies. Again, I'm telling you this from the lawyer's perspective. Do you imagine what is the workload on one single investigation officer? Well, no surprise they don't return the calls of the families of those missing in action, and they are very emotional. They have tonal thinking, and they don't have adequate evaluation of the situation. They are always stressed. They are under terrific stress, and I'm telling the coordination headquarters, make a step-by-step instruction how to contest the actions of the investigation officers, how to contact the investigation officers. But again, we have to relieve those load from the investigation officers. The family still is the phone of that loved one was somehow turned on elsewhere, and maybe somehow, I mean, I understand that's conspirology, but all of the families, they grab every single opportunity like this. Like my colleague properly said, like, people go to the course. People already do that. So after that portrait verification, they identify that it's their relatives, and then they submit the paperwork to verify their status as prisoners of war rather than missing in action. And we have another problem, that military units go to the course. I was saying that too, to recognize the military as missing in action, to just get rid of all those bureaucratic problems. Do you understand what oxymoron is happening in our society? We keep saying we love our defense forces, we fight for every single one of them, but at the same time there is no communication in place. The main thing we should do is to turn the state facing the citizens, rather than, like Miss Olena said, if you want help, you are the one who can help you the best. This is what the families do. They spend a lot of time in those occupiers' telegram channels. The families, they gather all those information, how many channels there are and how many fraudsters there are who try to make benefit of someone else's sorrow. But you have to explain it to everybody. No one brings you back your loved ones for money from Russia, because we're not fighting an adequate enemy. They make random decisions. You cannot agree with them on anything. And I'm really feeling for our law enforcement, because every single agreement can be broken. So if we can give an opportunity to our government representative to provide some comments on what was said. Well, first of all, I would like to say a couple of words about our department. We try to talk to everybody, every single family. We provide them with instructions about where to go directly if people send some requests to us. We send them all of the coordinates, where the criminal proceeding is, who is the investigation officers, their contact number, their emails. For the time being, in all of the regions of Ukraine, there are centers established for the search of the persons missing in action. They are made up of national police officers who have relevant skills and knowledge, and who can provide all of the necessary information to the families. So please contact your territorial units you were contacting, where you were contacting the police, where you submitted the reports to the police. And also there are our representatives in the regions who may provide the most comprehensive detail, the most comprehensive information about where to go, whom to contact, and they will support the applicants with all of the questions. Thank you very much, Ms. Valentyna. We have another question for a small. We have time for another small question. Well, if there are no questions, Ms. Olena, yeah, let me give a couple of comments about the explanation and briefings. I think that such briefings should be happening at the level of military units. Currently, there is a sufficient number of legislation in place who enable the servicemen to provide the DNA samples for further verification and matching, and before that, hopefully they will be properly explained why do they need it, so that they don't have to look for relatives further on. And it will definitely facilitate the work of our experts if, God forbid, that military will be gone missing and the DNA will need to be sampled. Thank you very much, Ms. Olena. I would like to thank all of the panelists. Hopefully the algorithms and procedures of communication will become better after this. Well, once again, today is the Global Day of the Persons Missing in Action, and Ukraine Media Center will continue just a couple of minutes. We are about to have the interactive presentation titled Satisfaction Among Kiev Residents with Mental Health Services. Stay tuned.